I worked for my mother's company for 12 years. I turned it from a tiny shop into a national brand. I never asked for anything, I just believed that when she named her successor, it would be me. But on the night of the 40th anniversary in front of partners and staff, she handed the CEO title to her new husband, a former model 6 years younger than me, and she looked at me like I was supposed to smile. But I stood up, walked out, and started a war she never saw coming. If you think this is just another family story, you're dead wrong. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next explosive chapters. Before the applause filled that room, I believed I was the one. But sometimes the betrayer takes the stage while you stand at the doorway, swallowing the truth in silence. They say legacy is inherited, but I disagree. Some of us aren't born into legacy. We build it with raw hands, sleepless years, and scars no one applauds. I didn't inherit Tran Co. I carved it into existence. My name is Camille Tran. I'm 35 years old, and until a year ago, I was the Chief Operating Officer of Tran Co., a national interior design brand that started with nothing more than a rusted van, 3 crates of hand-painted tiles, and my mother's obsession with symmetry. While she dreamed, I executed. While she pitched, I scaled. And while she stood on stage, I held the structure up backstage, sweating in silence. I wasn't born into a throne. I built the damn chair. When people see Tran Co., now the glossy catalogs, the soaring showrooms in 4 cities, the brand collaborations with luxury hotel chains, they think of elegance. They think of my mother, Rose Tran, the visionary founder, the woman who once redesigned an entire villa overnight because the doorknobs didn't speak the same language as the window panes. She's a creative genius, no doubt, but genius without infrastructure is chaos. And I was the infrastructure. There's this image people love to repeat: the young Camille in a pressed white blouse standing beside Rose at a furniture expo in Chicago, age 23, wide-eyed, soaking in inspiration. It's a nice story, polished. But the real story, I wasn't soaking anything in. I was negotiating with the freight delivery guys in the back alley because they almost dropped a full display unit down a flight of stairs. I was juggling Excel spreadsheets, chasing missing invoices, managing a part-time intern who printed every client proposal in Comic Sans. I was holding it all together, quietly, invisibly. My days started before sunrise and often bled past midnight. I knew every blueprint that came through our door. I sat in on every vendor call, every contract dispute, every delayed shipment we had to pretend wasn't delayed. I trained junior designers on how to manage egos bigger than budgets. I revised CAD files at 3 a.m. when no one else would. I knew the tax code in 3 different states by heart. I didn't just operate the company, I was its nervous system. People assumed I was next in line. Not because it was promised, but because it was earned. They'd nod at me in meetings, refer to me as the engine of Tran Co. A few even joked, "Camille is Tran Co." I used to smile at that politely. Now I flinch. I remember a Tuesday morning not long before everything unraveled. I had just come out of a vendor review meeting. The marble supplier in Colorado was hiking prices again, and we needed to renegotiate without fracturing the entire production timeline for 3 ongoing hotels. As I walked through the open concept office space, designed by us, of course, I passed by a cluster of junior associates. One of them whispered, "She never looks tired. It's like she's built for this." I stopped for half a breath, smiled, moved on. But the truth is, I was tired. Deeply, exhaustingly. Not from work, I loved the work, but from the imbalance. The quiet, lingering injustice of being essential, yet unseen. Every holiday, while my friends flew off to retreats in Tulum or weekend cabins in Vermont, I was updating implementation guides or rescuing designs from projects where clients decided last minute that teal was no longer spiritually aligned. Every family gathering, and I use gathering loosely because they were really just calendar placeholders for crisis control. I was the one explaining numbers, margins, burn rate, projected growth. My mother would smile, nod, then pivot the conversation toward her newest collection, silk-accented dining room concepts inspired by Vietnamese imperial architecture. I admired her vision, but I also cleaned up behind it. Always. She used to call me the compass. I thought it was a compliment. Now, I think it was a way to keep me functional pointed north but never steering the ship. And Adrian. Adrian was nowhere in the picture back then. Not yet. He would come later. But this beginning, it matters. Because without it, you won't understand what was taken. There was a moment just before Tran Co. opened our Seattle flagship, our biggest, most ambitious project to date. I stood in the new space, still dusty floors, unfinished, the air thick with fresh paint and tension. The build had gone 2 weeks over schedule due to an HVAC dispute, and the landlord was breathing down our neck. I stood in that echoing showroom phone pressed to my ear, talking to the city inspector who'd failed us on lighting code, while at the same time texting our fabric partner to reroute a shipment directly to the space. My blazer was covered in dust. My heels had blisters. But when my mother walked in with a photographer smiling wide for the camera, I smiled too, as if none of it was falling apart. As if this wasn't what holding up someone else's vision looked like. People clapped when she cut the ribbon. No one noticed I was bleeding under the bandage from slicing my hand on a rogue nail 2 hours earlier. That was the job. That was the contract I never signed but somehow upheld build support disappear. So when I say I didn't inherit Tran Co., I mean it. I mothered it. I raised it. I brought it from blueprint to reality. And I didn't do it for applause. I did it because I believed in what we were creating. I believed in the value of beautiful, intelligent, purposeful spaces. I believed that every home, every hotel, every gallery deserved more than aesthetics, it deserved soul. And we gave them that. I gave them that. Still, when you're the reliable one, people forget you bleed. They forget you dream. They forget you might want more than just a great job. They forget you might want the keys. So no, I wasn't born the heir. I became it. I built the foundation laid. The bricks watched the structure rise. And then one day I walked into a ballroom, high ceilings, gold leaf trim, champagne flutes in every hand, expecting nothing more than a celebration of 40 years of design brilliance, only to find out that legacy to some is still a game of names, of appearances, of alliances, made in hotel bars and justified by press coverage. But that's not this part of the story. This part is about the woman behind the name. The work behind the shine, the hours behind the applause. This part is about me, Camille Tran, the one who wasn't chosen because she never waited to be. The ballroom glittered like something out of a curated Pinterest board. Gold-accented fixtures reflected the soft champagne lighting, and suspended glass orbs glowed gently above silk-draped tables. Each table centerpiece bore miniature replicas of Tran Co.'s most iconic designs, the lucent mirror console, the jade spiral chandelier, the harmony lounger in eucalyptus grain. Everything was meant to whisper legacy, beauty, precision. And at the center of it all stood my mother, radiant in a floor-length ivory sheath gown, her silver-streaked hair swept into an architectural updo that matched the room's symmetry. Guests swirled around her, clients, editors, design influencers, old friends from architecture school who had flown in from Paris, Seoul, Melbourne. Waiters passed champagne flutes on mirrored trays. The air hummed with praise, reminiscence, and carefully calibrated admiration. This was Tran Co's 40th anniversary gala, a celebration of 4 decades of design brilliance. And though I hadn't said it out loud, I thought I knew what was coming. Everyone did. The night felt scripted, and in my version, the scene would crescendo with a speech, a heartfelt acknowledgement of my years of work, maybe even a formal passing of the torch. It wouldn't be dramatic. My mother would say something graceful and clear, and I'd nod quiet as always and accept. And behind my eyes, I'd feel that quiet vindication that all those years, all the invisible labor had led somewhere. Instead, I stood at the edge of the ballroom watching. I didn't mingle. I never liked small talk. I watched the crowd like a system who gravitated toward who looked restless, who sipped too fast. I knew the cost of every detail in that room, the imported flooring flown in from a delayed Italian shipment, the commissioned mural projected across the eastern wall, even the typography on the hand-embossed menus. And then I saw him. Adrian. He arrived late, of course. He always made entrances like they were second skin. His black tuxedo fit perfectly like it had been sewn directly onto his body. His hair curled at just the right angle over one eyebrow, and his tan looked curated, not natural. Beside him, my mother's face lit up like a spotlight had landed directly on her. Adrian didn't belong in this world, at least not until recently. He'd been a runway model, then a creative consultant, then something in tech-adjacent brand storytelling. When I first met him at a charity gala 6 months prior, he called my role at Tran Co operational magic, as if my work existed in some invisible realm. I'd smiled tightly. He was 29, 6 years younger than me, and as of 2 months ago married to my mother. Camille, a voice behind me, cooed. It was one of the PR staff, powdery perfume clinging to her words. Your mother's about to make the big speech, shall we? We walked toward the dais. My mother stood center stage, clutching a delicate glass of Dom Perignon. Her posture was regal. There was that slight tremor in her lip, a performative vulnerability I recognized from countless past presentations. 40 years, she began, voice echoing over the soft music as it faded. 40 years since I laid down the first sketch for what would become Tran Co in a shared apartment with leaky ceilings and one desk fan. Laughter. And over those years, we've grown not just in scale, but in spirit, in vision. We've transformed rooms, homes, and lives, and none of it would have been possible without partnership. I nodded slightly. Here it comes. Partnership from clients who believed in us, from vendors who supported us, from a team that evolved from 2 interns to a national brand. My heart beat steadier. I knew how she delivered narrative. The pivot point always came at the third pause. And of course, she said, her smile softening into something more ceremonial from the person who has redefined the very concept of what this company can be in the modern age. Yes, I held my breath. She turned slightly, arm extended. My partner in life, and now in legacy, Adrian Tran. The room went still, not silent, still. Like time paused just long enough for the mind to register impact before it collapsed. Adrian stepped forward, a soft grin on his face, dimples shallow, untouched by consequence. He kissed my mother's cheek. Cameras flashed. Somewhere near the bar, someone let out a confused cough. I didn't move, I didn't blink. And I'm proud, my mother continued to announce, that Adrian will be assuming the role of creative director and future CEO of Tran Co. His insight into the evolving market, his visionary approach to lifestyle storytelling, it's exactly what we need for our next chapter. There was a beat of silence, then applause, scattered, hesitant, then growing, because that's what people do in rooms like that. They clap, even when they don't know why. Even when they're unsure what they're applauding. My hands remained at my sides. I looked at Adrian, his hand resting on my mother's waist, like he'd always belonged there. I looked at my mother, radiant, composed, already gazing out at the room like it was a campaign shoot. And for a moment I wondered, did she forget I was here? Or had she always hoped I'd vanish from the frame? A photographer turned toward me, camera raised. I stepped back out of shot. People swarmed the stage, handshakes, cheek kisses, empty congratulations. I could hear someone say, "Bold move. He's so fresh." Another murmured, "Unexpected, but smart." I didn't hear my name once. I walked to the far edge of the ballroom past the row of floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside, the city blurred in bokeh street lamps glowing like silent stars. I found a side door, cool metal in my palm. As it clicked open, I heard the sound from inside, champagne glasses clinking together in celebration. The last sound before I left was the crisp echo of crystal celebration forged from silence, and I walked out before anyone noticed I was gone. The resignation letter was 5 sentences long. I wrote it in one sitting in the still dark hours after the gala, the taste of betrayal still warm in my throat. I didn't draft it 3 times. I didn't ask for second opinions. I didn't sleep. At 6:52 a.m. I pressed print. At 7:30 a.m. I left it on the edge of my mother's glass desk, next to the custom-made sculpture she insisted represented vision in motion. It was the quietest goodbye I could manage, and still it felt like screaming. No one was in yet, just the cleaning crew who nodded politely as I passed. I didn't linger, didn't look back. I walked out of Tran Co. in the same charcoal coat I'd worn the first day I started as project coordinator 12 years ago. Back then, I thought that if I worked hard enough, long enough, visibly enough one day, I'd be allowed to inherit the thing I helped build. Now I knew better. Outside, the city was already moving. Traffic hummed. Crosswalks blinked. The world, as it always does, carried on. I drove without thinking, no music, no route. At some point, I ended up in front of my old apartment, the place I had before I moved closer to headquarters. The rent was still paid. I kept it half from nostalgia, half from instinct. Like some small part of me always knew I might need to return to where I'd started. I climbed the narrow stairs and unlocked the door. Inside, everything was exactly as I left it. The wooden floor slightly warped by that stubborn leak from the upstairs unit. The beige sofa still too firm, the dusty orchid in the window that had died quietly while I was too busy polishing someone else's legacy. I didn't sit. I stood in the center of the room, coat still on, staring at nothing. A throb pulsed behind my left eye, but I didn't cry. Not yet. I turned off my phone after the 3rd news alert about the gala. Tran Co. ushers in new era of leadership, one headline said. The future is, Adrian said another. I didn't bother reading the articles. I expected texts, even one. From someone, an assistant, a vendor, a designer I'd mentored through burnout and bad breakups. Nothing came. Until 4:43 p.m. The message was simple. Camille, I'm sorry to reach out like this, but I'd love to speak with you. I think there's more to this story. Nina, editor at the Standard Line. At first, I thought about deleting it. I'd been in this industry long enough to know the rhythm of opportunistic coverage. Scandal, speculation, then silence. Rinse, repeat. But something about the wording more to this story stuck with me. I stared at the message for 20 minutes before replying. Not yet, but I'll let you know. Then I opened my laptop. Not for emails, not for documents or decks or project timelines. I opened a blank recording window. No script, no agenda. Just a mic, the glow of the screen, and silence. And I said the first sentence before I realized I was even speaking. When you build something your whole life, you assume you'll be allowed to stay inside it. My voice was quieter than I expected, almost steady. But sometimes they hand it to someone newer, shinier. Someone who never lifted the beams, never dug through the foundation. Someone who just looks better in a suit. I paused. My throat felt tight, but not with tears. With fire. I spoke for 18 minutes. About the early years, the all-nighters, the supplier who tried to cut corners until I threatened litigation, the time we saved a collapsing hotel contract by redesigning 50 rooms in 48 hours. I never said names. I didn't have to. The truth has its own fingerprint. When I finished, I sat still for a long time, listening to the silence after my own words. Then I hit save. That night, I created a new identity, a digital alias. A podcast platform with no photo, no brand logo, just a black and white sketch of a broken chair with the title scrawled beneath it. The Stolen Design. The irony wasn't lost on me, that after all those years of curating, refining, perfecting, the first thing I published without a team, without strategy, was raw, flawed, uneven, and somehow more honest than anything I'd ever made at Tran Co. I uploaded the first episode, privately. No announcement, no promotion, just to see if it felt real. The next morning I woke to 12 messages. 4 from strangers, 3 from anonymous accounts, 2 from old colleagues, 1 from Nina again, and 1 from someone I never expected. An architect from a rival firm, a man I'd once negotiated against for a municipal contract. His message read, "That podcast? It's the first time I've heard someone say what we all think, but don't have the guts to say, respect." I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a new recording window. This time I started with a question. What happens when you're the invisible author of a masterpiece and they erase your signature before it's even dry? I talked about hierarchy, gendered succession, the unspoken rules of legacy, the myth of meritocracy in design, the cost of silence. Each word stitched itself into something larger than me, a pattern I couldn't unsee anymore. By the time I hit stop, I knew this wasn't a moment. It was a movement. No logo, no launch party, just a voice. Mine. And for the first time, it was loud enough to hear. The first episode of The Stolen Design didn't go viral. Not at first. It floated quietly in the ocean of digital noise, a lone voice, unsponsored, untagged, unsigned. No SEO, no hashtags, no promotion plan, just truth. Uncut and unpolished. I uploaded it on a Wednesday night. By Friday morning, it had 312 plays. By Monday, it had 9842. And by the end of the first week, it hit 78,000 streams across 3 platforms. No face, no name, no credits. Just a voice saying out loud what so many had learned to keep buried, that sometimes the legacy you dedicate your life to will choose someone prettier, louder, or better connected and leave you in the dust you swept. I never expected it to take off. I wasn't chasing fame, only catharsis, but apparently truth had a frequency people recognized even when spoken from the shadows. Episode 2 dropped the following week. I titled it The Family That Forgot Me. It wasn't a tantrum. It was a diagnosis. I spoke softly, deliberately, recounting how decision after decision at Tran Co. had ignored the hands that kept it alive. I told stories anonymized, specific, undeniable. Like the time I flew to Milan alone while the rest of the leadership team, my mother and her then boyfriend, toured vineyards under the guise of research. I negotiated licensing deals and secured 3 showroom exclusives. None of those wins were announced publicly under my name. Or the year we doubled revenue, and the only person mentioned in the press release was the creative director, whose most consistent contribution was choosing the Office playlist. And I shared the moment so small, so stupid, that haunted me for months when my mother introduced me at a design awards dinner as the detail person. Not partner, not leader, just the one who got the invoices out on time. By the time episode 3 aired, the messages began pouring in. Anonymous notes, confessions, apologies, anger. You're not alone. I was passed over too. This industry worships charisma and kills loyalty. You're saying what I've felt for 10 years. The comments weren't just from women. They weren't even just from design professionals. Architects, engineers, photographers, stylists, assistants. People from every corner of the creative world wrote in stories of silence, stories of betrayal, stories of being invisible inside something they helped shine. But the ones that broke me were from former Tran Co employees. A junior designer from 2016 wrote, "I remember how you stayed late with me to fix a layout I messed up. You didn't shame me, you just helped. But it was Adrian who took credit in the next meeting. I quit 2 months later. Just thought you should know." A project manager I hadn't heard from in years sent, "The way you let us calm in the chaos was the only reason I didn't burn out. Seeing you disappear overnight without explanation, it broke the team more than anyone at the top realized. Even Nina, the journalist who had reached out first, sent me a private DM. I've heard rumors about what really happened that night. I don't want to publish a hit piece. I want to tell the truth. But it has to come from you." I didn't reply, not yet, because the podcast was doing something no article ever could. It was creating a mirror, and in it, people saw their own erasure. In episode 4, I shifted tone. From narrative to analysis. I spoke about what happens when a business wears the mask of a family, how accountability dissolves, how favoritism festers, how generational dynamics drown professional boundaries. I pose the question, what if your greatest betrayal doesn't come from an enemy, but from someone who once kissed your forehead before your first board presentation? That one hit differently. It crossed 200,000 streams in 4 days. The clip was shared on LinkedIn, TikTok, even Reddit forums titled Family Business Trauma. A therapist in San Diego tagged it as required listening for her entrepreneur clients. A small college in Minnesota used it in a gender studies seminar. I watched it all unfold from my apartment, wrapped in a blanket, sipping burnt coffee. I didn't feel famous. I felt exposed. And yet I kept recording, because the story wasn't finished. The stories never are. That Friday night, I sat in bed scrolling through messages, hundreds now. Some grateful, some angry, some confused. Most of them just raw. And then it arrived. Short, silent, untraceable. No name, no profile photo, just a message. I also built something I wasn't allowed to keep. I stared at it. The timestamp read 2:11 a.m. 10 minutes later, another one came from the same account. I was supposed to take over my father's agency. He gave it to his new wife's son instead. I left. I never told anyone. Your voice brought it back. I hate that it still hurts. And then the last one. I guess I'm not the only stolen design. I didn't know who they were. I never found out. But I whispered the words out loud anyway. I'm not the only one. Because somewhere in the tangled world of ambition, bloodlines, and quiet injustice, I wasn't. And maybe that more than anything was the point. They didn't just steal a company. They stole the story. But I was stealing it back one episode at a time. Truth has a texture. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it scratches. It started with a folder. A pale blue file tucked deep inside one of the boxes I had brought back from Tran Co boxes I hadn't touched since the day I left. I wasn't ready then. But now, with the stolen design gaining traction and strangers whispering their own betrayals into my inbox, something inside me stirred awake. I hadn't set out to investigate, not at first. I just wanted to remember. To lay my hands on the paper trail of what I had built. But memory is slippery and real paperwork, doesn't lie. The folder was marked Q3, Reynard Hotels. A big client, a hard client. The kind that treated deadlines like dares and design mock-ups like cocktail napkins. We'd spent months crafting a bespoke line for them, walnut inlays, recessed lighting inlaid with mother-of-pearl, a bar cart with modular compartments named after coastal cities. I remembered the final meeting clearly. I was there. I negotiated the overages. I led the strategy shift when they panicked over launch week delays. But the contract inside the folder told a different story. It bore Adrian's signature, and mine. Except I never signed it. I stared at the loopy C curling around the T in my last name. Neat. Too neat. Stylized as if it had been practiced. The date was wrong too. A full week before the final negotiation call, I knew it happened. I flipped through the folder again. The approval notes were in someone else's handwriting. Notes I had never seen. Language I would never use. And that's when I felt it. That sharp scratch of truth. I opened my laptop and pulled up my old work email archive. I still had partial access a backdoor from a project sync we'd once set up between devices. It hadn't been revoked, probably because no one thought I'd need it. Maybe they'd forgotten how thorough I'd always been. I started searching keywords: signature, approval, contract, Reynard, creative lead. The first few were standard scheduling emails, PDF attachments, internal design revisions. But then, an email chain flagged as confidential, do not forward. It was from Adrian. Subject line: reframing author credit. Camille approval assumed. The thread included a CC to the legal team and a file titled Updated Narrative Structure, External Release. And the body: let's proceed with framing the Reynard partnership as an Adrian Tran innovation. Camille was involved in early coordination, but not in a leading creative capacity. She's aware and has no objections. Signature obtained. I leaned back, heart stammering against the walls of my chest. She's aware and has no objections. Signature obtained. Lie, lie. Forgery. That night I didn't sleep. I started printing everything: PDFs, email chains, time-stamped edits. I highlighted lines, added sticky notes, numbered page corners. I created an analog system for a digital betrayal. At 3:12 a.m. I received an email. No subject. Just an attachment and one sentence. This never sat right with me. The sender was a name I recognized: Malik Bennett. He had been a junior coordinator in operations. Quiet, diligent. Not the type to rock boats. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year. I opened the attachment. It was a scanned contract older than Reynard, dated 2 years prior. A deal with a boutique firm in Berlin, mid-sized but influential. I vaguely remembered the project: minimalist spaces with sustainable accents. But again my name, my signature, and again forged. The lines were smoother than my actual hand. Too perfect, too confident. Accompanying the PDF was a forwarding trail. Malik had originally been copied in on an internal review thread where someone, not me, had pre-authorized a contract for PR release. Adrian's name appeared 5 times. My mother's appeared once in a final approval timestamp. They'd known. They had done it deliberately. This time I did cry. Not because I was shocked, but because the thing I had feared, the thing I never wanted to believe, had a paper trail now. And it had my name printed and twisted against my will. It wasn't just professional theft, it was identity laundering. I spent the next 72 hours buried in files. I cross-referenced contract IDs with email threads, cross-checked timestamps with digital calendars I still had access to. I made a spreadsheet: columns for date client named lead, actual lead discrepancies, forged authorization, corroborating documents. It was like digging up my own corpse over and over. 7 contracts bore forged elements. 4 internal memos reassigned credit to Adrian after I had completed 90% of the execution. 3 official press releases rewrote project history entirely, inserting him as the vision and me as operational oversight. Operational oversight. It was the phrase that did me in. I'd heard it before casually at a board meeting. My mother had used it to explain why my title had never moved to executive director. Camille is best when she's close to process, she said once. She likes being the anchor. No, I had never liked being the anchor. I had learned how to be one because someone had to hold the damn ship steady while she flirted with the wind. Now I saw the truth. I wasn't an anchor. I was a shield, a signature, a placeholder. And I'd been rewritten, redacted, and reassigned again and again until even I couldn't recognize my own footprint inside the company I helped build. But now I had evidence. I had names. And more importantly, I had motive. The stolen design was never meant to be investigative journalism. But truth evolves, and this truth demanded light. Because once you realize your name has been used like currency passed around, stamped onto documents to legitimize decisions you never made, you stop caring about optics. You start caring about justice. And that's when I made a decision. The next episode wouldn't just be about pain. It would be about proof. And the first line I wrote in my notes for that episode read, "Sometimes they don't just steal your voice. They fake it. It didn't happen all at once. Tran Co. didn't crumble like a building imploding under dynamite. It cracked slow, deliberate, and terminal like old marble under pressure. The kind of damage you don't see until it splits wide open. The first fracture came quietly. An internal memo leaked on a Tuesday morning. Subject line: Client Realignment Strategy, Q4 Adjustments. It was a polite euphemism. But inside the memo were two names that rattled the entire agency: Solstice Properties and Rayburn International. Combined, they accounted for over $4.6 million in annual contracts. Gone. No warning, no negotiation, just terminated. Solstice cited strategic misalignment. Rayburn's exit note was colder, inconsistent leadership and tone-deaf creative proposals. No one had to guess what that meant. Adrian. By Thursday, the murmurs started. Whispers in break rooms, Slack channels gone quiet, designers ignoring invitations to vision-building coffee chats. Adrian insisted on hosting in the conference lounge, complete with jazz playlists and kombucha samples. I watched from afar, detached and strangely hollow. Like witnessing your former home catch fire and realizing with guilt and grim acceptance that you'd taken your name off the mortgage just in time. A week later, 3 department heads resigned. First, Lila, head of accounts for almost a decade, the woman who could anticipate client dissatisfaction like a weather change. Then Marcus, the marketing director who once rebuilt the entire brand deck during a 2-day blackout while everyone else panicked. Finally, Ravi, operations, the heartbeat of the logistics team. He didn't send a resignation letter. He simply stopped showing up. Everyone understood. And Adrian, he panicked. Not outwardly. Not the way amateurs do, yelling or blaming. Adrian's panic was performative. Controlled. He smiled harder. Walked faster. Scheduled more meetings with titles like Synergy Summit and State of the Brand. But the cracks were showing. His voice cracked once mid-sentence during an all-hands meeting. When someone asked how he planned to recover the Rayburn loss, he said, "The thing about design is that it evolves. Like water. It flows where it needs to go." The silence that followed was so suffocating you could hear someone's phone vibrate 3 rows back. 2 days later, Adrian held a press conference. It was a desperate move, and everyone knew it. The invite described it as a vision announcement hosted at an upscale hotel ballroom with hors d'oeuvres and ambient lighting. He wanted to reframe the narrative, control it, spin. But spin only works when you have gravity. He walked onto the stage in a beige turtleneck under a tan blazer, looking like a rejected Pinterest board for casual visionary. He started talking about reimagining legacy, infusing Tran Co. with fresh energy and vibrational innovation. I watched it live-streamed with a mug of coffee in my lap and my jaw clenched tight. Then came the quote, the one that would echo. I think the old Tran Co. was a bit rigid, too obsessed with detail, too focused on accuracy and tradition. That kind of design is over. People want feeling now. People want vibes. Feeling. Vibes. As if precision and discipline were dead weight. As if the company's decades-long reputation for architectural integrity and cultural fluency could be replaced with vibes. By the next morning, the internet had done its work. Designers clipped the quote and stitched it onto TikToks of collapsing chairs and crooked bookshelves. Twitter posts popped up like wildfire. Adrian Tran says vibes over structure says a lot, honestly. But the real damage wasn't memeable. It came when the Financial Ethics Review Board flagged an inquiry, a quiet investigation that began with an anonymous tip and quickly unearthed something far worse than bad leadership. It started with a grant. $250,000 from Tran Co.'s Corporate Social Responsibility Fund earmarked for an urban renewal program in New Jersey, except the nonprofit receiving the funds didn't exist. Not legally. What did exist was a shell company in the Caymans, owned by Adrian. The name was barely changed Adtran Impact Limited. The story broke 3 days later. The headline was Devastating New Tran Co. CEO Linked to Offshore CSR Fraud. Within hours, the board went into emergency session. Within minutes, clients began distancing themselves publicly. Statements, tweets, a few thinly veiled passive-aggressive posts about professionalism in uncertain times. But the employees, they didn't post. They just walked. Whole teams packed up desks. Slack channels went dark. Group texts lit up with things like, "I'm out. You and no way I'm going down with this ship." By week's end, 27 people had resigned, including 5 senior creatives. And through it all, my mother remained silent. Not a press statement, not a video, not even a staged Instagram post of her holding a design book and sipping tea, her go-to "I'm unbothered" move. She disappeared behind the glass walls she once stood proud within. And I realized with a strange clarity that this wasn't just a rift in a company, it was a fracture in belief. Because when the thing you built no longer reflects your values, and worse, begins to actively betray them, walking away isn't weakness. It's survival. And maybe, just maybe, it's justice. Because some legacies aren't inherited. They collapse under the weight of their own stolen foundations. The office didn't look the same. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the productive quiet I used to protect like sacred ground, but a hollow, unnatural stillness. Like a house emptied mid-renovation. Walls that had once held sketches, mock-ups, and notes in my handwriting now displayed oversized abstract canvases in burnt orange and mauve. I didn't recognize a single one. Reception was unmanned. The orchid I'd cared for in the front alcove had been replaced by a tall ceramic sculpture, jagged, expressionless, and painted to resemble fractured skin. The space felt like a showroom trying to impersonate a soul. And then I saw her. She was sitting in the corner glass office mine once the chair turned slightly toward the window as if waiting for a verdict from the skyline. I stepped inside without knocking. My mother didn't flinch. She turned slowly, eyes half-lidded, her posture perfect. Immaculate cream blazer silver pin at the collar, lipstick that hadn't faded even as the company had begun to bleed out. "Camille," she said, her voice even, measured. "You didn't call ahead." "I wasn't sure I'd be welcomed," I replied, tone matching hers, restrained but barely. She gestured to the seat across from her, the one where I had once spent hundreds of hours debriefing team metrics, arguing over contracts, laying out launch schedules. I didn't sit. She folded her hands atop a single folder on her desk. "I assume you're not here to reminisce?" she said, a faint exhale behind the words. "I came to look you in the eye," I said, "and ask how long you've known." Her smile was brief, controlled. "Known what? About the forged approvals, the rewrites, the press releases that erased me like I was a footnote." She tilted her head slightly as if studying a distant painting. "You're referring to Adrian's adjustments." "No," I said, sharp. "I'm referring to the erasure of 10 years of my work, my leadership, my voice." A beat. Then she said it, soft, effortless, cruel in its simplicity. "You were never the voice, Camille. You were the engine. And engines don't speak. They move." The sentence hit harder than I expected. I swallowed it. "For years I said I did the work you didn't want to do. I took the meetings, cleaned the messes, held the walls while you colored them." "That's what you were good at." "Efficient," I said, my voice flat. "Reliable. Detail-obsessed." She didn't deny it. "I built your foundation," I continued. "I sacrificed my 20s, my sleep, my relationships for this place, for you. And look where we are now," she said, gesturing vaguely to the room. "In chaos. Not because of your absence, Camille, but because of your resentment." I stared at her. "My resentment," I echoed. She nodded. "You always wanted credit, control. You couldn't just support, you had to be seen." I let that hang in the air a moment. And then I asked the question I had carried with me like a blade. Is that what you really think of me? That I'm too hungry to deserve what I built? She looked at me unblinking. I think she said you were too dry, too mechanical. You never understood how to inspire. The words were surgical. I laughed once, short and bitter. You're calling me dry, I said. You think structure is dry. Discipline, precision. You call the sacrifices I made. I paused. And then quieter. You call my sacrifice dry? My mother sat still. You lacked warmth, she said, as if narrating a performance review. The team respected you, but they didn't love you. Adrian brought energy, emotion. Adrian brought fraud, I snapped. He brought theft. He brought destruction under the mask of charm. She stiffened. He made mistakes. He made headlines I cut in. And you let him. You handed him the keys to the house I spent a decade holding up, and now it's on fire. I didn't know, she said, but there was no conviction behind it. You chose not to know, I replied, because it was easier to believe I was too, competent, too exact to inspire anyone. She finally looked away. That more than anything felt like an admission. I let the silence hold. Then I stepped forward, placed a thin folder on her desk. Inside were copies of the contracts, the forged ones, the ones with my name in curves I never wrote. She didn't open it. She stared at the cover like it might burst into flames. I spoke slower now, lower. I'm not coming back to save you, I said. I'm not here to clean up your mistake, but I am going to expose the rot, the rewrites, the way you commodified my silence. She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand. No more spin, I said. No more narratives. You don't get to reshape me in your image anymore. Her voice cracked for the first time. I thought I was protecting you, she said so quietly I almost didn't hear it. You were protecting the version of me that was easier to control, I replied. The obedient daughter, the backstage operator, the loyal extension of your name. I stepped back. She looked older than I remembered, not weaker, but finally human. I turned to go. Just before the door, she spoke again. I never stopped being proud of you, she said. I paused. But you stopped showing it, I replied without turning around. And then I walked out of the office I had once ruled in silence, now empty of the woman who had filled it with everything except permission for me to be seen. Outside, the air felt sharp and honest, and mine. It broke on a Wednesday. The article dropped at 6:07 a.m. sharp. No teasers. No whispers, just an immediate, devastating headline splashed across the homepage of the Standard line. Inside, the collapse of Tran Co nepotism fraud and the man who was never supposed to lead. Written by Nina Valdez, the same young journalist who once reached out to Camille in a quiet, almost apologetic email. The piece was part investigation, part eulogy, and part reckoning. It was 200 words of surgical detail, airtight sourcing, and something rarer in journalism, righteous restraint. It began with a simple line, everyone saw the gala, but no one saw what it cost. By noon, the design world was in a tailspin. Nina's article laid it bare. The misappropriation of CSR funds routed through offshore accounts under Adrian's name, the forged contracts bearing Camille's signature, the internal memos reframing leadership narratives to erase her contribution entirely. It even included leaked audio from a private meeting, Adrian on tape, laughing over a glass of whiskey and calling Camille a glorified secretary with a calculator fetish. Camille read the article once, then again, then printed it out and highlighted 3 lines. Not for vengeance, for validation. The internet did the rest. LinkedIn exploded with designers posting their own experiences of erasure. Twitter trended with hashtag stolen design and hashtag Camille was the core. An Instagram carousel featured side-by-side screenshots, Camille's name missing from old press releases and her face blurred in gala photos she organized. Adrian's silence stretched to 24 hours. Then 48. Then 72. Finally, a statement arrived, hollow, corporate, and 100% too late. At this time, Mr. Adrian Tran is cooperating fully with the ongoing review and has chosen to temporarily step away from his role as CEO to allow space for transparency and healing. It was signed not by Adrian himself, but by a spokesperson who spelled Camille's name wrong in the attached FAQ sheet. But the real blow came that Friday morning. Camille opened her inbox to find an encrypted tip from a former Tran Co financial officer. Attached was a spreadsheet, several in fact, that showed recurring payments from the company's philanthropic division to an LLC listed in Belize under Rose Tran's name, her mother. The woman who once taught her how to layer textures in an entryway now showed up in a ledger trail connected to fraud. The transactions weren't large, small transfers monthly rounded to inconspicuous numbers, $4,970, $5,250, $4,880, but the pattern was unmistakable. And the memo descriptions: community project support, executive liaison consultation, legacy initiative fee. Legacy. It always came back to that word. Camille stared at the screen until it blurred. Then she called Nina. By that evening, Nina had verified the documents through 2 sources. By Monday, a second piece dropped. Rose Tran under investigation for financial misconduct. How a design empire became a family affair. That was when the phone calls started. Not to Camille. To the firm Camille had left behind. To Tran Co.'s legal team, their remaining board, their insurers, their institutional partners. The story shifted from one man's fall to a family's unraveling. And then came the lawsuit. 12 names, all former employees, filed jointly. Cause systemic intellectual property theft, retaliatory workplace practices, and willful credit misrepresentation. Each statement included detailed accounts of contributions, overwritten concepts, stolen public credit reassigned. 5 included Camille's name directly citing her leadership, her mentorship, her sudden disappearance as the beginning of the firm's ethical collapse. She hadn't asked for that. They did it anyway. One line from the legal filing stuck with her. We were not just denied credit, we were denied visibility, denied dignity, and denied the right to own our own brilliance. Camille printed that sentence, framed it. Meanwhile, Rose remained silent. No denial, no admission, no apology. The industry began to shift. Publications that once named Rose among the top 10 visionaries of contemporary space quietly removed the article from their site. A major client put their upcoming Tran Co. campaign on hold indefinitely. And Camille, she said nothing, not because she had no words, but because she didn't need to speak over the sound of truth catching fire. Nina asked if she wanted to make a statement. Camille declined. I already did, she said, nodding toward the podcast mic on her desk. 10 episodes ago, she wasn't interested in watching her mother fall. She was busy building what no one could take from her this time. And the world finally was watching her for who she was, not who she was supposed to support. Not a legacy, a reckoning, and a beginning. The room wasn't big, but the air inside it was heavy with memory. An industrial loft in the old textile district exposed brick high ceilings, mismatched chairs, but none of it mattered. What mattered were the 23 people seated in a circle, each holding a name tag they hadn't worn in years. Some of the tags had faded, smudged by time or coffee spills. Some were never printed in the first place, just handwritten in black Sharpie like secrets finally allowed to speak. Camille stood in the center. No microphone, no stage, just eye contact. A few of them avoided hers. That was fair. She adjusted her sleeve. It trembled slightly, not from nerves, from the weight of what she was about to say. Thank you for coming, she began. No scripted intro, no polished charm. Her voice was low, honest, worn in the way only truth could wear someone down. You don't owe me your presence, she said, but I owe you my silence. One of the women, Amina, a former intern who once drafted an entire campaign that won the company a global award and was never credited, looked up, her expression unreadable. Camille continued, There's something about being close to power. It makes you think that patience is strategy. That silence is a kind of investment. I thought her voice caught, but she didn't flinch. I thought if I waited long enough, stayed useful enough, I'd be given what I earned. A pause. But that's the lie, isn't it? No one answered. No one needed to. I was complicit in that lie. Not by design, but by fear. And fear doesn't erase harm, it delays it, deepens it. She looked around the circle, one face at a time. To all of you who gave this industry your best ideas, your nights, your weekends, your boundaries, and watched someone else's name rise while yours disappeared, I see you. A ripple of breath. You shouldn't have had to leave to be seen. You shouldn't have had to fight for the right to be remembered. She walked toward a small table in the middle of the circle. On it sat a leather-bound book. Inside were pages of sketches, campaign drafts, color swatches, and proposal notes, all anonymously submitted by designers who once worked under Tran Co. and had never been credited. I kept these, Camille said quietly. They were too good to throw away, but I didn't know whose they were until now. Her hand rested on the book's spine. I didn't build Camille. Studio to just reclaim my name. I built it so no one else has to fight to keep theirs. She took a breath. And today we're starting something else. She held up a folder, simple and white. On the front, the Reclaim Fund. It's a creative equity fund. Seeded by the award money I received from the Design Futures Initiative, matched by a few partners who believe in radical attribution. Its sole purpose is to support independent creatives whose work was buried, misused, or stolen, not just with grants, but with platforms publishing support and public recognition. A hush settled. Amina leaned forward slightly. Camille's voice didn't rise, but it anchored. I want this to be more than money. I want it to be repair. I want it to be a warning to every room that ever mistook loyalty for silence. And I want every young designer who walks into a room to know if someone tries to take their name, we'll be louder. It was Amina who spoke first. What changed? Camille turned. I stopped trying to be chosen, she said, and I chose myself. A small silence, then applause, not thunderous, but real. One by one they came to the table, touched the book, wrote their names in it next to the work they'd once abandoned. It wasn't legal reclamation, but it was emotional, symbolic, powerful. A designer named Luis, who'd once designed the modular showroom, now listed under Adrian's portfolio, opened to a sketch he hadn't seen in 7 years. God, he whispered. I thought I'd made this up. I thought maybe I'd dreamed it. Camille handed him a pen. You didn't, she said. You just made it before they were ready to give you credit. By the time the meeting ended, the book was filled with 23 names. Each one was scanned, archived, documented. Each contributor would be credited on Camille. Studio's website, in a new section, The Lost Portfolio, a permanent public record of buried brilliance no longer forgotten. Camille stood by the door as they left. Some hugged her. Some nodded quietly. Amina lingered last. Next time, she said, don't wait until they burn the whole thing down before you light your own fire. Camille nodded. I won't, she said. And if I do, remind me. The door closed behind her. Outside the city pulsed. Inside her chest, something repaired itself, not by being whole, but by finally being true. And that she realized was the beginning of healing, not fixing what was stolen, but giving it a name, a space, a future. The collapse didn't come with fire. It came with silence. Emails stopped being returned. Phones rang unanswered. Meeting rooms sat half full with interns trying to hold together departments that no longer existed. In less than 4 weeks, Tran Co. lost 70% of its contracts, not through scandal, not through lawsuits, but through retreat. Quiet exits. Clients backing out without warning. Entire portfolios vanishing from public association. The world didn't shout about it. It simply walked away. And that was louder than any press release. Inside the glass tower that once bore the Tran name in brushed steel panic rippled through every corridor. Adrian, no longer the smirking face on digital billboards, hadn't been seen in days. There were rumors that he'd flown to Lisbon, that he'd been detained at Heathrow, that an international inquiry into money laundering had opened 3 days ago, that his creative advisory firm in Croatia had been a shell. Camille didn't follow the updates. Not closely. They came to her anyway. A journalist she'd once ignored sent a link at 2:17 a.m. Interpol confirms investigation into Adrian Lorne's financial dealings. Links to Tran Co suspected. She closed it. Didn't forward it. Didn't gloat. It was no longer her war. But her mother was still there, still clinging to the throne of a company that had bled out beneath her watch. On a gray Tuesday morning, a formal letter arrived from the board of directors. Effective immediately, Tran was to be suspended from all executive operations, pending an external audit of Tran Co's fiscal transparency and organizational ethics. Camille read the PDF once, then again, not for clarity, for reality. This was happening. This wasn't vengeance, this was consequence. Outside the press circle, Tran made no statements, no apologies. But those who'd worked close to her saw the shift, the way her voice lost heat, the way her hands trembled when she signed her final boardroom document. One executive later told The Guardian, "It was like watching an empire fold in on the air it forgot to breathe." Camille stood across the street from the Tran building. She hadn't meant to come here, but some part of her wanted to look. Not to see them fall, to see if she felt anything when they did. The letters on the building had already been stripped. Blank steel. People walked past without noticing. Behind her, a voice familiar, cautious. "I didn't think I'd see you here." It was Elias, former CFO, one of the few who had quietly left months before the exodus began. Camille turned, slightly smiled. "I didn't think I'd come." Elias nodded toward the empty facade. "They're going to rebrand it. Sell the IP to a holding firm in Singapore." She said nothing. He added, "You think that's closure?" "No," Camille said. "But it's something else." "What?" "A warning." She turned, walking away from the building. Elias didn't follow. That afternoon, Camille sat alone in the small recording room of her podcast studio. The mic was off. The lights dimmed. She wasn't there to record. She stared at the wall, the one where she'd pinned early concept art team photos, post-its with late-night ideas scribbled in ink. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. What the world didn't see, what headlines couldn't explain, was that Camille had already grieved the company. Not now, not during the scandals, but years ago, when her name was erased from credit sheets, when her late-night proposals were pitched under someone else's signature, when she celebrated a milestone alone in the break room with a lukewarm coffee while the visionary team toasted on stage. This wasn't rage. This was release. And sometimes collapse was the only honest ending. Let it fall. Let it rot. Let something better rise where the silence used to be. Camille stood, pulled the blinds open. Sunlight spilled in, catching on the curve of her desk, the warmth of unfinished oak, the sharp lines of a blueprint she and her team had been working on for a community design center in rural Louisiana. This was her now. Not a throne, but a table. And at her table, no one had to steal a chair just to belong. There was no appointment, no email, no warning. Just the sound of the studio door creaking open, the kind that didn't belong to delivery drivers or interns or collaborators who came with laughter and coffee in hand. Camille looked up from her desk. It was 9:14 a.m. The morning sun painted soft shadows across the cement floor of Camille. Studio. The design team hadn't arrived yet. She liked it that way. The silence before the storm of blueprints and buzzwords and playlists curated for flow. But now that silence broke with footsteps. Slow, deliberate, familiar in the most difficult way. Her mother stood in the threshold, holding something flat wrapped in linen. Camille didn't stand, didn't move. Her spine stiffened, her eyes narrowed just slightly, enough to shield whatever softness might have tried to rise. Tran didn't say hello. She didn't look around or comment on how the new space smelled like cedar and ambition. She simply stepped forward and placed the wrapped item gently on Camille's table. No words, just her fingers brushing the fabric once, almost as if blessing it. Then, without ceremony, she turned to go. Halfway to the door, Camille finally spoke. "What is it?" Lean didn't turn. "The first one you ever drew? The cafe redesign, you were 16. Camille blinked. That file was gone, lost in a digital migration 10 years ago, or so she'd believed. "I didn't think you kept it," she said, quieter now. Lean paused, still facing the door. "I didn't keep it. I framed it." Silence, thick, not heavy, not sharp, just full. Camille wanted to ask why she was here. Why now? Why that drawing? But something in her throat stayed still. Not fear, not anger, something else. Lean looked over her shoulder. "I'm not asking you for anything." "I know," Camille said. "I just thought you should have it." And then she left. No apology, no speech, no rewriting of what had already torn. Camille sat alone for a long time before touching the package. She undid the linen slowly as though memory itself were fragile. And there it was. The lines were crude, the measurements slightly off, but the vision even then was all there. The way sunlight could bend through a row of skylights and fall across terracotta tiles. The way color warmed space. The way people could feel seen just by how a chair curved at their back. It wasn't brilliance, it was belief. She hadn't seen that drawing in 19 years. She hadn't seen her mother like that in almost as long, silent, stripped of power, and for once without performance. That night, Camille didn't record a podcast. She didn't answer emails or look at the analytics that showed their company now ranked number 2 on the most trusted design firms of the year list. Instead, she sat by the window. The studio lights dimmed behind her. She looked at the drawing again and thought of her mother's hands. Not the ones that pointed from boardroom podiums or held champagne flutes, but the ones that used to wrap her hair in a towel after bath time. The ones that taught her how to hold a ruler without pressing too hard. The ones that used to trace the rim of Camille's teacup when words were too much. There were pieces of her mother worth mourning, but also pieces not worth saving. And maybe, just maybe, that's what adulthood really was. Not forgiveness, not forgetting, but understanding. Camille said nothing out loud, but her voice would return soon enough. In the next team meeting, in the next mentorship workshop, in the next design that bore her name, not her mother's, hers. And the voiceover would say, "Not everyone deserves forgiveness, but everyone deserves to be understood, and sometimes that's enough." The ballroom shimmered with light. Not the kind that came from overhead chandeliers, but the kind that pulsed from ambition, from polished trophies waiting to be lifted from designers in tailored black who had fought tooth and claw for their names to mean something. Singapore, the International Design Forum. Camille Tran stood backstage, framed by deep curtains and deeper silence. In front of her, a sea of strangers. Behind her, a team holding their breath. Her name was about to be called Visionary Designer of Asia. It wasn't just an award, it was a punctuation mark. It said you weren't erased. It said you were always the blueprint. And yet, as the MC's voice carried her name across the room, sharp, bright, final, Camille didn't smile. Not yet. She walked out with poised steps, grounded eyes, calm. The applause roared like a tide. Somewhere in the crowd, cameras flashed, hands clapped, and the air pulsed with the energy of recognition. But Camille heard none of it. She only saw one thing: a woman seated alone in the back row. Her hair pulled low, her back slightly hunched. No press badge, no entourage, no power. Just presence. Her mother. And for the first time in Camille's life, Lean Tran looked small. The award gleamed in her hand, heavy, cold, unmistakably hers. She stood at the microphone. The applause died. Camille didn't look down at notes. She didn't clear her throat. She simply spoke. "My name is Camille Tran, and this is for every architect, every creative, every unseen hand who was told they were part of the team until it was time to shine. and suddenly they vanished from the credits. A pause. Not for drama, but for breath. To anyone who's ever been told that value is something you're given by a vote, a bloodline, a man in a suit, let me say this clearly. She held the trophy up, not high, not showy, just enough. Value doesn't come from what they hand you. It comes from what you claim, from what you build with your own broken hands. Somewhere in the crowd, someone gasped quietly. Somewhere else, someone began to cry. Camille didn't flinch. I am not the result of a legacy. I am the beginning of one. Thunderous applause followed, but Camille barely heard it. Because in the back row, her mother's shoulders had folded inward. Her eyes, once sharp as wire, now brimmed with something Camille had never seen before. Tears. Not for loss of power, but maybe loss of connection, of the daughter she'd failed to see. Camille stepped down from the stage, not triumphant, transformed. And as she walked past the rows of rising ovations, past the faces that finally saw her, she didn't stop at the journalists. She didn't stop at the designers. She stopped at the last row. They locked eyes. No words. Just gravity. Lean opened her mouth, but no sound came. Camille held her gaze, steady, honest, not cruel, then turned and walked out, with her name back, with her voice louder than applause, and with no one left to choose her because she'd already chosen herself. The camera pans across a quiet lecture hall, not empty but reverent. Camille stands at the center, hands wrapped around a whiteboard marker, dressed not in haute couture, not in armor, but in soft linen and clean shoes. No podium, no script, just her voice. Her eyes scan the room. Young architects, urban visionaries, women with notebooks open wide, men with questions hiding behind posture. Design, she says, is not just for buildings. It's for lives, systems, selves. Cut to a TEDx stage in Bangkok. Camille stands before a red circle, no slides behind her, only stories. The blueprint they give you isn't always yours, she says. Sometimes you have to tear it up. Cut to a government boardroom in Hanoi. She's the only woman at the table, but everyone listens when she speaks. The soul of a city isn't in its skyline, Camille says, pointing to a proposed transit map. It's in how gently it moves its most invisible citizens. A minister nods. A journalist scribbles. A younger Camille, somewhere in the shadows of the past, watches this unfold and smiles. Cut to her studio, now expanded, now thriving, but quieter than before. No PR campaigns, no champagne in the fridge, just the hum of collaboration, the rustle of sketches, and the thud of real impact. Camille walks through, not inspecting belonging. Someone hands her a proof copy of a book. Hardcover, silver foil title. Self-made blueprint author Camille Tran. She runs her fingers over the embossed letters. It feels like skin she grew herself. She reads the dedication aloud in her studio's atrium. To those told they're replaceable, you're not. To those who waited to be chosen, stop. This is your permission slip. Build it yourself. A round of quiet claps echoes through the open space. No cheering, no show, just understanding. Montage. A city in India hosts her keynote on circular architecture. She laughs with local students. A low-income district in Manila welcomes a housing project Camille sponsored, designed with the residents, not just for them. A documentary shows Camille walking through a metro tunnel renovation in Seoul, not with heels and cameras, but with boots, dust, and blueprints under her arm. Cut to her podcast mic, the same one she started with. She's recording a special episode, the final one. Voice calm, full seasoned. This began with anger, then became a whisper, then a declaration, and now it becomes something else. She exhales. If you're listening, don't let legacy define you. Don't wait for an open-door sketch, your own threshold. You're allowed to design a life that doesn't ask for approval. She pauses, leans in. Because the most powerful thing I ever built wasn't a room. It was a self. Click. Recording ends. The screen fades to black. A single page turns. Camille, now standing on a rooftop garden in Tokyo, plants growing from recycled walls, bees circling a hive installed in the corner, looks up at the rising sun. A call buzzes on her phone. Madam Tran, the UN Urban Task Force has approved your appointment. Will you accept? She looks out over the city, smiles small reel inward. Yes, she replies, but only if I can bring my own compass. And she walks forward, not into the light, not toward applause, but toward the blueprint she hadn't been given, the one she drew herself. A quiet room, a single chair, a mic. This is how it ends. Camille presses record. Her voice, once sharp and relentless, now carries the soft weight of memory. This is the final episode of Stolen Blueprints. But I didn't come here today to talk about business or design or justice. I came here to talk about someone I've never met. She pauses, breathes, listens to the silence before filling it. My father. Cut to black and white photographs flickering across the screen. A man with warm eyes holding a pencil in one hand and a baby's sock in the other. The photo is bent at the corner. Camille holds it like a fragile truth. He left when I was 2 months old. I never knew his voice, never knew his reasons, and my mother, she never spoke of him. Until last year. Camille walks through her studio clutching a yellowed envelope, inside a letter written by her mother dated 15 years ago. Never sent, never meant to be read. She wrote, I don't hate you for leaving. I hate that you left me to become strong alone. Camille's voice tightens. That one sentence shattered something in me. Not out of anger, but recognition. Cut to a memory reimagined. Camille as a teenager watching her mother stitch together fabric samples at the kitchen table at 3:00 a.m. No words exchanged. Just silence stitched into every corner of the room. For years I thought she resented me for not being enough. But now I know. She resented the world for not giving her the space to fall apart. Cut to podcast recording studio again. Camille's voice is steady now. This business, Tran Co, wasn't built out of ambition. It was built out of fear, out of survival. My mother started from zero, yes, but I never realized that I was her anchor, and maybe her cage. The mic crackles slightly. She doesn't stop. I used to say I wasn't born to inherit. I built it. But now I see I was trying to build a version of myself she could finally love. Or forgive. Silence. A different kind of silence. The silence of unspoken truth finally given breath. Cut to a flashback. 1 year ago. Camille and her mother sitting in the back of a dark auditorium after the fallout. The stage empty. The lights off. They sit shoulder to shoulder, but not face to face. Camille, did you ever think you made the wrong choice? Her mother. Which one? Camille. Me. Her mother didn't speak, only held Camille's blueprint, her first design, in her lap like a shrine. That was the only answer Camille needed. Cut back to podcast mic. I understand my mother now, but I am not my mother. Her tone isn't cold, it's resolute, kind. She built with bricks. I build with light. She fought silence with control. I fight it by naming things out loud. Cut to a soft montage. Camille speaking with design students about mental health in creative industries. Her donating studio space for single mothers learning trade skills. A wall in her office covered in photos of women and daughters, not products, not blueprints, but lives. Voiceover. To those of you who came here for revenge, I understand. But this was never about winning. This was about reclaiming. She pauses, then lets the final line fall heavy and clean. Sometimes the person you most need to forgive is the one who taught you strength. Cut to black. Silence again. Then, an unexpected sound, the quiet chime of a phone message. Camille opens her phone. It's a voice memo. From her mother. Trembling, unfamiliar, unpolished. Camille, I heard your episode, and I still don't know how to say sorry, but I wanted you to know you were never the wrong choice. Camille closes her eyes, and this time she doesn't cry. She smiles like someone letting go, not because they were asked, but because they're finally ready. Fade out. The studio was quiet, not silent. Camille never liked silence, but quiet enough to hear the hum of breath between her ribs. The late afternoon sun fell across the wall of design mock-ups, bathing the space in a warm, dappled glow that danced across the wooden floor. And right there, framed in black walnut, hung the one thing she never thought she'd let see the light again. Her first sketch. She was 16. It had been on graph paper, curled at the edges, the ink bleeding where her hand had trembled. A sketch of a reading nook under a staircase. No frills, just clean lines and heart. It wasn't a masterpiece, but it was the first time Camille Tran had drawn something and believed it could change the way a person felt in a space. She stared at it now, lips parted just slightly, not in wonder but in something older, something softer. Not pride, not quite forgiveness. Something like arrival. Behind her, the studio was humming, people typing, laughing quietly, bringing coffee to each other. Her people, her floor, her walls, her name, Camille. Studio etched onto the steel plaque at the door, not gifted, not inherited, built. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She didn't check it, not this time. Instead, she leaned against the opposite wall facing the sketch. Her voice, low and unhurried, narrated the stillness. For most of my life, I waited for permission. I waited for someone to say, "You've earned it now. Step forward. Take the keys." But I was standing in the wrong hallway. She stepped forward. The truth is, some people won't open the door because they can't see you, or because they refuse to. She reached up, adjusted the frame. But there's another kind of power. The kind you don't inherit. The kind you don't perform for. The kind you claim. A pause. We are not the ones who were chosen. We are the ones who choose. Outside the windows, traffic continued its endless rhythm. The city pulsed on. Somewhere out there, deals were being made, chairs being pulled out at long polished tables Camille would never sit at again. She no longer needed to. Not all thrones were worth the cost. She walked across the studio, now measured steps. At the large communal table, a young designer, barely 23, looked up at her. "Is it really yours?" she asked, nodding toward the sketch. Camille smiled, not with her mouth, but with something deeper. "It was," she said, "and it still is." The girl beamed. "It's simple, but kind." Camille paused. That word, kind. She used to think kind was the opposite of strong. But now she understood it was the final evolution of strength. The kind that didn't need to be loud, didn't need to prove, just held. She walked toward her glass office, but before entering, she turned. One last time, looked at the team. The furniture, the sunlight, the woman she had become. Voiceover fading into black. "This isn't just for me. This is for every person who got edited out of the blueprint. For every voice made to shrink so someone else could echo louder. For every daughter expected to stay silent while someone less deserving was handed her crown. You don't have to be handed the light. You can be it." The screen fades to black. One final line appears handwritten across the dark, for those who were forgotten in the design of their own life. Fade out. Silence. Then the faint click of a pen drawing its first line somewhere new.